Hey, good morning, John.
Oh, there he is. Good morning, my friend in Wales. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. Still very excited by all the comments we're getting on
Oh
the
yeah,
on the
yeah.
shows we've released so far.
This has been great, and we're even getting people saying they want 2 shows a week, and I'm like,
Ah,
okay,
remember
yeah,
Canrecchi? Remember we did
yeah, well,
30
yeah,
shows in
yeah.
30 days.
If ever you feel you need a Nick and John fix, we've given you that mother load supply of Nick and John shows. Anyway, woo. Yeah, and this week, we came up with all these questions for people to answer. All my questions, at least, um, will reflect what a state of flux I'm in about this book. I mean,
Yeah,
we've talked about the three things we know for sure about this book. The first one being, the surface story is simultaneously way too complicated
yeah,
and it doesn't really work. So it's one of the most unsatisfying of all rolling surface stories. I mean,
yes,
um, the next one is that the eighth book has to be understood as the setup for the ninth and 10th books, and in 10 years, people aren't going to be reading this book saying, wow, that's really disappointing. I was really looking forward to a resolution of all these things. They'll be reading it in light of what they've learned in books 9 and 10. It's like Half-Blood Prince or something. It's not a
or,
book that's going to stand on its own merits. It's going to sort of bleed into the last two books.
or
Not,
Goblet of Fire. So Goblet of Fire has got the same kind of qualities of the plot is far too overcomplicated and is frankly ridiculous. But it acts as a bridge between the first half of the books, which is a schoolboy series, and the last half of the book, which is the adult dark caps lock Harry.
yeah, it's also the alchemical, you know. I mean, you have the reverse alchemy of the first three books, then you have the straightforward
Yeah,
alchemy, but it gets a lot deeper. And that leads into the third thing we know about this book is that if you're reading this thing at the surface level, really looking just for the, engagement with the plot and the new characters and the mystery, or at the moral level, violence against women is bad. This is really an unsatisfying book, especially if you had expectations and you made predictions about this has got to happen, and we see this is going to on those levels. Um, Rowling really mixes it up in this
yeah,
book in terms of, or messes it up, if you will, on those levels. For example, just always it was about how women are tortured and beaten and raped and assaulted, and it was sort of like, okay, I get it. She's a feminist, and we're gonna have that. That's an important message, and that's what she does. In this book, we got a lot about men who are neglected and suffered and forgotten. That's um that's a pretty important shift in terms of her saying, look, I understand, I'm not just a one note, composer here. I
yeah.
do have other things. I do understand the larger picture on things. But back to the point, if you read the book just at the of the four levels, you're only talking about the surface plot and how satisfying or engaging it is, whether it gave you that big surprise at the end, or the moral of the story, or maybe just the romance of it. You come out flat on this book. If you followed all the Twitter headers and you were really all in on that, and Rowling says, that all the clues are in there, well, it didn't give you much satisfaction in this book. We're at the stage now, though, where we're talking about the mythology. We're going to be talking about the alchemy. We're going to be talking about the embedded text, the Freemasonry. I mean, this is where Rowling lives, and this book has a lot to offer on those levels. But it takes some, as Ruskin said, it takes some deep mining. You've got to sit in front of this book and start doing the charting. And so this week, I'm sending out stuff tonight to the paid subscribers. I've started charting the book, um, and that's always very satisfying when it's done, Nick. It's like a writer that came to my prep school once said that her mentor said to her, "Do you like sitting down for long periods of time?" And she says, "No, I hate that." She said, do you like writing?" And she said, "No." And my answer to him has always been the same on this count. I hate writing. I love having written. And and the process of charting a book, which again, I will eventually share this with all the free subscribers, but I'm going through it with the paid subscribers now so they can see what I'm doing and stuff. I don't like doing that, Nick. It's a little bit like, you trimmed your fingernails too tight or something. It's like, ouch, I know I want to do this, but ouch. Now I'm going through that process, and it's rewarding because this book is it may look like a I don't know, Appalachian backyards or something. It may look like a horrible mess. A lot that has cars and washing machines and trash, but it actually is more like a F-15. It's a lot of moving parts, but boy, when it hums and hums. All right, I'm ready to dive into these questions, Nick.
Okay.
This. Boy, let me pull up my screen here. Page on my questions. There we go. All right. So we've talked about how Hallmarked Man is not going to be remembered as the big stand. It's not going to be remembered as soon as Nick books them out as the latest book. And so we've been talking about it in terms of what things he seems to be setting up for the next two books. And we have a whole show to that. But it's also going to be remembered, I think, because of the book that came just before it. We've got two novels in a row that turn on spiritual, not religious sects. The Universal Humanitarian Church in Running Grave, and now the Freemasons in Hallmarked Man. Both the fictional and the real sects. I mean, obviously UHC is fictional and the Freemasons really do exist. Both of them have ties to Christianity, but they profess that all faiths in God are equally valid. There are Hindu Freemasons or whatever. And the guru of the UHC like to quote from all revelations. Nick, I'm going to start this off with my question at you. You've suggested in a way that Rowling's dad may have been a Freemason. What springs in Rowling's lake of inspiration can we see behind this focus on non-creedal spiritual communities? All right, I'm just going to leave that. What have you got for us on where does Rowling come up with this stuff?
So you've opened with the soft question first, the Rowling and God. So we know for lower middle class British family, Rowling was quite unusual. So her family wasn't that unusual in that they almost certainly, the children went to a Church of England primary school. And through her comprehensive school, we would have had religious education. We would have had faith-based, Church of England-based school assemblies where there were school prayers, special dispensations for the believers in funny religions like Roman Catholics, would have been excused assembly, but for the vast majority of the school, there would have been Church of England assemblies with school prayers. But her family were not church attenders. All governmental forms where it says religions, they almost certainly would have put down C of E. We're reasonably confident that they were Church of England. Peter's a brother. It's a little less certain. Her cousin certainly went to a Catholic school, but it's almost certain they would have been Church of England. They married in the Church of England church, but they didn't attend services other than baptisms, marriages, and funerals. Extremely common. What was uncommon?
Wait. They live right next door to a church.
Yes.
They live in a house called Church's Cottage. I mean,
yes.
All right. So I mean, that's pretty unusual if you live. I mean, they have no excuses for like, oh, how hard it is to get to church.
Yes.
This was like roll out of bed, fall into church.
Now,
Anyway.
I don't think St. Luke certainly hasn't got a full peal of bells, but if they have any bells to call for service, that would have significantly reduced the price of Church Cottage. But no, they didn't attend church. In the Smith biography, it suggested that Peter was a warden. I think that is erroneous. So I think he had no association with the church that he lived next door to. What was unusual in that family circumstance is that Rowling started attending church. So the graveyard, the church grounds, the church itself back in those days would have been permanently unlocked, would have been a sanctuary, a playground. It would have been familiar to both Joe and Di, I think, as you know, as part of their area. It was safe for them to play in. We know at some point Joe and then later Di received pocket money for helping to clean the church. And we know that Joe started attending services uniquely in her family.
And she said that she liked what was being said there.
Yes. So again, we know so little, and it's really quite annoying. So we don't know who preached. We don't know which priest from the parish was in charge of holding communion there. We don't know, although it's very likely there was a Sunday school there. So I think it's fair to assume that Joe initially would have attended Sunday school, but we don't absolutely know where and when she was confirmed. Even if she was confirmed after confirmation, she could have received communion. The services would have been from the Book of Common Prayer, but we don't know whether the preacher was what we would call an Anglo-Catholic, so a very traditional service using the same Elizabethan language that we find in Shakespeare, or whether he was one of the more modernist type preachers and used modern languages. We don't know whether there was chanting. We don't know which hymnal they use in there. In a rural parish, more than likely it would have been more of a traditional service rather than a modern service. But we know she was exposed to that. And then we have a long gap where we just don't know. We don't know whether she attended services. We know she attended services when she moved to Edinburgh, at least initially. She was a member of a congregation. She actually worked as a clerical assistant doing secretarial work for a church in Edinburgh. It was an Anglican communion, so it was church in Scotland, and we know she attended services. That they are sort of our 2 points of reference in terms of organized religion. In terms of the more esoteric, we have reports of her practicing astrology and tarot in Wydeen. We have to treat that as credible, but I don't know how accurate that is. We don't know how seriously we took it. We know that she spent a year in Paris, very close friends with two what were later professional astrologers. Okay, in their initial profession, it was pop astrology. So they were doing it for a magazine, you know, and it's sun signs rather than star signs. But we know, again, by the time she moves to Edinburgh, she's mastered the art of astrology to a near professional level. We've read one of the charts. It's available. It's available out there. It's witty. It's funny. It's accurate.
It's illustrated.
It's illustrated. Freemasonry. Now Beatrice Gross has guessed for a while that Rowling has an interest in Freemasonry. She's mentioned it publicly really only once, and that is her explanation for her subconscious choosing the Deathly Hallows symbol, which she traced back to The Man Who Would Be King, Rudyard Kipling book that was turned into a very famous film. And the plot turns on the Masonic device of the square and compass, with the all-seeing eye in the middle. My guess, without any factual evidence whatsoever, is that it's possible that Peter Rowling was a Mason. And my reason for this guess is he worked. So that they lived in Tuts Hill, which is in Gloucestershire. Originally, they lived on the outskirts of Bristol, which is where Peter Rowling worked for his entire career. The Rolls-Royce aero engine factory in Filton. Freemasonry in Bristol is a little unusual. So, although it's all under the Grand Lodge of England as a regular Masonic jurisdiction, all of the lodges in Bristol practice a slightly unusual form of masonry. It's actually an older form of masonry, and they have one ceremony to become a Master Mason called passing the veils. You may think of the veils in the Department of Mystery. This used to be part of the ceremonial to becoming a Master Mason, but in regular Masonry, that was taken out of the Master Mason's degree and became a part of what's called the Royal Arch degree, a separate structure independent of the Grand Lodge of England. But in Bristol, it was retained. And because of that retention, that feeds into another order in Bristol called the Rite of Baldwin, which has allegedly 7 degrees, but no matter how many times I count all the different titles and degrees, I can never quite come up with 7, but they say there's 7 degrees to the Rite of Baldwin. And it appears to be a very early form of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Masonry. So that masonry with 33 degrees. And it now forms part of that under the UK jurisdiction for the ancient and accepted rite. But it's unique. So they have unique degrees, they have unique ceremonies. The provincial Grand Master of the Rite of Baldwin for the province of Bristol is treated as a provincial Grand Master in the ancient and accepted rite. But the only people who can attend their meetings and their ceremonials are people who have been inducted into a Bristol lodge, so they can become a Master Mason and pass those veils. Now, so far, that's not a convincing argument for Peter Rowling was a Mason. But
thank you. But thank you for all that.
But so Peter Rowling certainly was, I think it's fair to describe him as a social climber. So the reports we have of how pleased he was to move into a proper house like Church Cottage, into a nice middle-class area and away from the working class areas of Yate and the outskirts of Bristol. If we take the textual evidence, and again, I know this is I'm suffering from the biographical fallacy again, but if we take if we take the evidence we've got from Casual Vacancy, then he's the kind of man who's looking for the edge, for the advantage to get on in life, how he can make deals. I would imagine for such a Masonic stronghold as Bristol, where he was working, where many of his colleagues may have been Masons, that would have been a draw for him. Knowing Rowling as we do, that what she loves about things, about astrology, even though she may not believe it, she loves the structure. She loves the rules. She loves the way you can chart it and the complexity of it. And I think something like Masonry, and particularly Rite of Baldwin Masonry, would have really appealed to her, with the ceremonial appealing to her the same way that the Book of Common Prayer appeals to many Anglicans. But Freemasonry, I mean,
what access would she have had to it as a woman?
None. So it's a little bit more open now. I have a friend who is a Mason, and we have visited his temple. Sarah was shown around everything. I was excluded as a non-Mason, but women are taken around because it's not a secret. It is an organization with secrets, but it's not a secret organization. Sarah, because she could never be a Mason, it can be shown everything. Because I potentially could become a Mason, I can't be shown the stuff that I haven't been elevated to. But back in those days, there would have been no access for her to gain much, apart from if he took home to learn the ceremonials for his advancement in degrees. He would have had an opportunity to have read that.
Okay.
So talking about Freemasonry, so I've heard a rumor that you've been on a shopping spree on Amazon.
Before we get to my library here, my things here, I want to just talk for a second about you mean British humor here. Yeah, the soft question about Rowling and God. Still pretty much in the way as the guy who wrote the book, right? Yeah. About Rowling's comment in that tweet about the God-shaped vacuum within her. And how this is this is really the unresolved issue of her life, and she doesn't expect it to be resolved until she dies. Meaning that's going to be the Lake Inspiration driver for basically what she does, and that we know, as you said, very little about her relationship with the church at Exeter, her relationship, except she said she fell away there, I think, because of hypocrites or something like this. Yes, pretty pedestrian adolescent atheism or agnosticism. Been there. Yeah. And then we don't know what happened with her relationship with Michael and her relationship with the church then. Yeah. We know nothing about church life, if any, when she was in Portugal. Obviously, there's not C of E parishes right and left in Porto. And then she comes back, and
I think there is an Anglican church in Porto. So Porto was the main centre of the British port trade, which was a trade that was essentially invented to satisfy the British appetite for port. Many of the port companies are actually British owned, and the family names are still British names out there, and they have an Anglican church in Porto.
I love it. So that old joke about where there are four Anglicans, there's a fifth. Yeah. That may be that there's port involved too. All right, great. This is a soft question. This is the question. In this book, these two books, the UHC novel where Robin in the really the nadir, if you will, of the book is put into a box and largely just mentally broken, psychologically shattered. She rises from that thing. She sees the child that she's been pursuing really the whole time that she's been inside the UHC's compound there, the farm. And then she knows Strike is nearby and she runs to him. Now that crisis, that climax really of her time at the farm right before her escape is, I think, the central point of those two books, because in Alchemy, and this actually has something to do with incest. We'll get there, Nick. Is in Alchemy the essential process is the purification of soul for its union with spirit, and then its reconjunction with the body, and that is often represented as a woman in a coffin separated from her husband, the queen, and then her conjunction with the king.
Wow.
After she's been in the box, and their reunion there. You remember that Strike and Robin actually go to bed after that, scene. Now, that's kind of the alchemical crisis of that book, and I think you can see the next book, the one we just finished, Hallmarked Man, with all of its Freemasonry images, and really it's the backdrop. It's really the stage on which all of this is laid out for us. It has these things like the decapitated head and the arms and such, and the three-barred cross, and we actually get to go walk through the temple 17. It's I think that's the crisis of the albedo, this purification of the spirit before its reunification with the body, and we're seeing that also with Rowling's promise via that tweet with the image of Cupid and Psyche, that we're going to see the reunion of them after her trip through hell. I mean, she's really doing the alchemy and the mythology in conjunction, so that this makes sense. And she's begging for patience. This is a large canvas that I'm painting on here, and I'm working some pretty difficult things. Please, pump the brakes on they're not in bed yet. When are we going to get the snogging scene? That's, I think we're seeing the agony of purification of soul and reintegration of soul and spirit. We're seeing that agony in these occult sects that are only loosely attached to, proper religion and traditional faith. That Rowling is not going to show us that. I mean, she's going to use mythology, she's going to use alchemy, and she's going to have it in these, spiritual, not religious sects. Because she can't show those things inside conventional churches. I mean, she could if she was George MacDonald. George MacDonald did that all the time. But but she's not that writer. She's not a person who knows people. In fact, I wonder. I speculated in our last show whether that dedication piece, where she said that her time with Sean and what's Sean's wife's name, Deidre.
Nadine, is it? Oh.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
She said that they gave her back something that she thought she had lost forever.
Yeah.
And I speculated about what that could possibly mean, and I think I came up with the wrong answer as usual. It's great to have a track record of bullseyes, because people will forget all the misses, along the way. But I think maybe she was talking about the fact that these are faithful Catholics, and that she had some fellowship inside a conversation with Christians about what it really means. It's not about the politics. And gosh, is there any more political, mad church than the C of E? The Orthodox Church. Okay, I can name one. The Catholic Church. All the churches. Anyway, there's always distractions,
Yeah.
and the demons are always on the walls, ready to grab your distracted mind from this purification of soul for integration with spirit, and you lose track of that, and how important fellowship is in that. She highlights that when talking about Freemasonry, where Robin says, "Why do men do this? What's that about?" And she calls it, what, five-a-side soccer? Basically they're just in it so they can have somebody get outside of the house, talking with their wives about. And Strike's like, well, there's a little more to it than that. There's hierarchy, and there's nothing. Well, how about the fact that they don't feel there's anything esoteric or especially challenging about their conventional church life? Which, I mean, as an Orthodox Christian, that's we do ritual, Nick, and it is it's noetic on principle. People don't like the Orthodox Church because it's not rationalistic enough. It doesn't conform to Enlightenment standards. That's what I think Freemasonry serves in a large part in the West. Rene Guénon talks about that, and that Freemasonry is largely filling a slot that the Roman rational church, basically the Catholic Church, doesn't satisfy. Okay. Anyway, there's a lot of people are accusing you, Nick, of dredging the lake. Maybe it's me, because I'm the guy who's going for the what's down there, what's down there in the mud. But until we have that critical biography, we're not going to really know all this. But it's something that you have to be aware of when looking at this, is that Rowling is spiritual, not religious. She doesn't like the rules and the dogma, which is basically the ascetic side of the church. She's not into that. And forgive me, I think it's largely about the sexual rules, which are not recent. That's not a Victorian thing. That's first century. People were saying, "Wow, these people are really prudish." That's about purification of soul, union with spirit. All right. Whew. So I really want to emphasize, Nick, that I haven't gotten any answers today. Sometimes I come in here and I'm just like, "Hey, let's talk mythology," and I got something. I've done that work, and I'm really ready to lay out the answers I've got. Right now, we're in week 5 or 6 since this book has been published, and now we're getting into the depth stuff. The alchemy. Why there's a lion and a griffin inside this book. That's a big alchemical thing. Have I worked it out to my satisfaction? No, I haven't. Am I going to share it here? Yes. To my future embarrassment, I'll probably talk about that. But anyway, you mentioned my library. Let me talk about my. It's
sat there, John. It's sat there.
Let me talk about my library here. This is really. I don't smoke. I'm too small to drink. I can't really. I mean, maybe that's why I left the Anglican Church. Though if you become Orthodox after leaving Anglicans, the Greeks and the Russians, they do it. They do the little drinking thing. Anyway, I buy books, and there's an unfortunate website called bookfinder.com, which allows me to buy books at a cost that doesn't bankrupt me. So the first of my 12 Freemasonry books.
Wow.
I don't know. Can you see the titles of these things as I hold them up?
Yeah, I think so. Morals and Dogma of Freemasonry.
Okay, this is the monster. This is the Albert Pike, your Confederate general in Arkansas. He writes up Morals and Dogma of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, and it's basically the 33 ceremonials and everything you have to. If you're a Mason, this is really just your starting text to get yourself to be the Grand Master 33rd level or whatever. You've got to go through all of these stages. And Rowling quotes from this. I think this is the largest text for epigraphs. It's not the only Albert Pike text that she quotes from. She also quotes from The Liturgy of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite by Albert Pike. Okay. Yeah. This is actually 3 books. And it's it's got the symbols and ceremonials and special things. If you're a Mason, this is also an essential thing. But I think it's Hardacre that says he doesn't really like those books. He likes Bridge to Light.
There we are.
Now, this book, profusely illustrated with color, it has you step through all of the degrees with the rubrics and the accessories, if you will, that are used in each of the ceremonials. This book is much more expensive than these books. Even though I think it's given to people that become Masons so that they can work their way through it, it's not one that people sell that often. It also has the Legend of Hiram in it, which we'll come back to, because that's kind of the core text of all this. Anyway, so that's the first thing is the books that Rowling mentions. I'll put this. Here's the sound. Boom! Shakes the whole floor. All right. Then the next set of books that I got were history books. The first one is the Templars, because the Freemasons claim their descent from a sect of Christian knights, usually considered the Crusaders, and the whole right about Solomon's Temple and Hiram Abieb's death and stuff like that. That comes from their connection with the Templars. I confess, and I'm going to look at this, especially to see how much I can find about Hiram Abieb and the Temple. But I'm much more interested in these 2 books. One is John Dickey's The Craft, which people. This is published by a major house, and it's the subtitle is How the Freemasons Made the Modern World. And in it, I think, Nick, you will be as astonished as I was about in the United States, George Washington largely founds the United States on Masonic principles as a Masonic fraternity. And this is true of American presidents through at least FDR and Truman. Truman has his painting done wearing the apron and the regalia, whatever. I mean, he was really into it. And in the UK, the royalty and the aristocracy was, forehead deep in Masonry, and throughout the world, they take Masonry globally. Really, it's a UK phenomenon from the early 18th century. With exceptions, as you explained in Bristol, it's pretty much uniform rite, and it travels globally. Eventually, they bring in Hindus. In the United States, they have black Mason things, even in the South. I mean, it's an amazing world within a world that escapes, because it's not a secret sect, but it's a sect with secrets. They largely the fraternity prides itself on its separateness. And there's another book too, which is called this David Hackett's book from, I think, University of California Press. Yeah. The Religion in Which All Men Agree, Freemasonry in American Culture, which goes into a greater depth about how Freemasonry informs a large part of the American worldview. And I have another book that I don't have right at hand here that is about the occult in the United States, and it largely turns on the fact that the leaders of industry, politics, media, the courts, whatever, the Congress, all of it is in the fellowship of Freemasons. This is not even getting into the Mormons, who have taken a large part of their ceremonials, to include the veils and stuff like that, directly from Freemasonry. Then we get into some goofy stuff, which is fascinating. And this is kind of like the, what the von Daniken idea about chariots to God type thing. And this
Oh yeah.
is, and the leaders of that are writers Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, and they've written several books, all talking about Hiram. One is called The Book of Hiram, and the subtitle there is Freemasonry, Venus, and the Secret Key to the Life of Jesus. Okay, now the Venus here is not the mythological god, but the planet Venus, and it's how those Neolithic circles and stuff like that in the United Kingdom were largely set up, believe it or not, to track Venus because it is the most accurate planet in terms of keeping time, which I didn't know until this morning. Yeah, and it's also they're concerned about the pyramids. This one's called The Hiram Key, Pharaohs, Freemasons, and the Discovery of the Secret Scrolls of Jesus. This is that Freemasonry, according to these books, reveals what Christianity is really about. Color me skeptical, Nick. But anyway, I mean, you haven't heard any wonder-working saints coming out of Freemasonry. That this would be because they don't know that. But anyway, this is its own genre about Freemasonry books, and so I have a couple of samples of those. Then we get into what I think are the more interesting things. First, first I have to talk about this one because this one I bought just for me, and that is The Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry.
Wow.
And it's written by a 33rd degree Mason, Brent Morris, PhD, and the subtitle there is A Myth-Busting Introduction to the History and Practice of Freemasonry. And that's going to be great. I did find one fact in there I'll be coming back to from this book about Calvin.
Okay.
Yeah, Calvin, his name comes up in this thing. Then there's this book, which I'm not sure why I bought it, except that it's profusely illustrated. And it has wonderful pictures throughout the entire thing and the Masons draw great pictures. It does have an interesting chapter here about the Hiramic legend, which I'll be talking about. Maybe we'll get to today. Those are fun. Come back to that. A lot of Hiram things here, and then there's the books that were written by figures that are giants in the world of the occult and in comparative religion. The first and most important is René Guénon, the seminal perennialist writer. One of his first books, which wasn't translated until the 1960s, was about Freemasonry. And it's not the explosive type of work that he did on theosophy, where he basically showed that was nothing but a farce and really a desecration of Asian religions. Freemasonry, he writes something close to an apologetic for it within Catholicism, that where Catholicism had really tried to cut out its esoteric heart, Freemasonry was in his mind, to some degree, not 33rd degree, but to some degree, it's a providential esoteric rebirth on that. Guénon, unlike Schuon and Coomaraswamy, was largely unfamiliar with Eastern Orthodox Christianity, so it's an interesting thing. And I'm going to send the paid subscribers a PDF copy of Guénon's book. That's interesting. But then there's Manly Hall, which those people who follow the occult in the United States will recognize that name. A giant in the sort of theosophical Enlightenment type world. And he wrote a book called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It's a bit like the Bridge to Light. It's pretty much a poor man's guide to the 33 degrees and the ceremonials. It starts off, just what I like here is that it has, there's no way this shows up here. It shows Hiram being raised from the dead by Solomon and his lion's paw, wearing a lion's mask. And I think, again, you're getting, that kind of the bizarre named child, the lion. We're going to come back to the incestuous relationship, which gets us a lion, which exposes the Griffin. That's actually all alchemical symbolism and language, in which it seems frankly stupid when you read it as a story, but then you see what Rowling, the tools that she's playing with and the symbols that she's trying to share there, then it makes sense. All right. If you're after artistry and meaning in Rowling's work, and that would be yes. I mean, did you see that tweet where it says, "Are we stupid to be following these Twitter headings?" And they had a little picture of a woman saying, "That's me." I want to do one of those for the artistry and meaning thing. I think Rowling would probably say, "No. You're not smart to do the artistry and meaning thing. Ignore John. Ignore John in the corner." All right, and the last book, also by a giant. Because it's by Arthur Edward Waite. Do you recognize that name, Nick? Arthur Edward Waite?
The surname rings a bell.
He's the guy that comes up with the standard tarot card deck. There's no way that Rowling doesn't know this guy. And you asked, have I come up with anything from all these books? Yeah, I've got enough detritus floating around in my head from Freemason symbols that I'm going to come off as a gibbering idiot if I try to start talking about it. But I did find one thing that I thought was really funny.
Okay.
And that is that inside, this is alphabetical. It's an encyclopedia, but it's a rambling. It's more like a junkyard, that has rough categories. Chevys over here, and it's just not. It's not. It's not the. It's not the library at Oxford. This is not. No. This is not organized.
So it's more Barnaby's.
That's right. Well, sure enough. I'm just flipping through this book because it's 400 or 500 pages, and it's all done in bizarro, florid Victorian prose of the esoteric school, and that's definitely an acquired taste. And Nick, I've been reading that off and on for 40 years, and I've never acquired the taste for it. But anyway, that's what it is. And then I came across this passage. Alphabetically, Saint Martin, and then if you go back farther, you'll find that there's a specific type of masonry called. I'm trying to find it. Oh well, basically there's a Martin rite within masonry that's like as masonry is to the world, so the Martin rite within masonry is to Freemasonry. I mean, this is the really secret stuff. And I don't know about you, but I thought, oh, Martin, who is talk about the thumb on the hand. The Ellicotts are this pure white bread family.
And then there's Martin.
They're homespun. He's a sheep doctor with 47 letters after his name, and puts out magazines about sheep. And the mother is super mom. You don't know what it's like to be worried about your daughter. And all the children, they're breeding like sheep. They're just having more and more children, and it's a big one loving clan. Let's go out and drinking on Christmas. And we have Martin, who is insane. And if Martin weren't insane, he decides to marry a woman whose name, if you follow anything to do with opera, would make you run for the hills.
Oh yeah.
You know, Carmen as an opera is about, I don't know, she's certainly not a prostitute with a heart of gold. She's a mad harlot out to destroy. Left. I mean, she's a force of nature, like a tornado.
Yes.
Um,
Femme fatale is probably cutting it a little bit too kindly. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, seriously, I was reading this morning about just a Wikipedia review of the plot, and like, am I remembering this right? Yeah, she's crazy. And the composer of the opera died in its first month or so of performances. Didn't know it was going to become Carmen. That work, they say that no woman, no composer or librettist team has ever tried to create a character, a woman that was as mad as Carmen. And I just mean song in Latin. So I mean, it's like, well, you know, how bad can that be? Well, it's pretty bad if you get the associations from literature, and that's clearly what Rowling wants us to do. Well, Martin decides to marry her. You know, they're like, okay, could that be more volatile? I mean, for those who don't know this, Carmen entrances a man and takes him down. He's a guard. He's going to marry the woman that his mom wants him to marry and everything. And then Carmen sings him a song and he's entranced. Then he winds up being thrown in jail. And then he fights with a guard thing and he winds up having to live with the robbers. But all this time now, he's just madly in love with Carmen. And then she's like, I'm not in love with you. You know, she's off to go after the bullfighter or whatever. And spoiler, I'm gonna destroy people's ideas. You know, they haven't seen Carmen. Anyway, you know, Carmen has the greatest death scene maybe in all of opera, as Jose, her wannabe lover, you know, says, "If I can't have you, nobody can have you," type thing. Well, it's just like, wow. And then they have a child, and his name is Dirk. I haven't done the research, Nick, but that doesn't sound like that's a.
So Dirk is a stabbing knife, a Scottish.
Okay, that's what I thought. It's just like,
yeah.
Carmen, who dies, I think, of a knife wound, right?
Yeah.
And her name's her kid Dirk. I mean, this is like, really, really. And so I'm wondering if first of all, the other kids in that family, there's Michael, named after an archangel. There's some Masonic, you know, resonance there. Stephen, though, proto-martyr of the church. Yeah, I haven't seen any reference to Stephen inside these things. Which is not to say they're not there. Seriously, I have the books on my shelf now. I am not a Freemasonry guy. I should tell people that Orthodox Christianity is as anti-Mason as the Catholic Church is, which is to say it's still a problem. If I've told you the story, Nick, you can edit this out of the thing. I've already told you the story, but I remember a priest saying to me that when he was in seminary, they were taught in Pennsylvania and New York, the big Orthodox centers in the United States, that when you go to do a funeral, the priest is to put his hands inside the coffin to feel along the edges of the body, because the Masons would put their symbols and regalia there. And if the priest finds them, he holds them up and says, you bury him yourself. This man is not Orthodox. He's a Mason. I mean, it's that big a deal, you know, that they were trained to look.
And it's quite it's a plot point in War and Peace as well, isn't it? So Masonry and the Orthodox religion in Russia.
I mean, and that's largely about Western influence inside Orthodoxy. So we hear a lot about the Catholics don't allow you to become a Mason, and obviously there are, however, many Catholic Masons. The same thing is true with Orthodoxy. There's a bit of a war going on there, and why that's the case. So when I say I'm an expert on Freemasonry, I can see all my Orthodox friends doing oh, really, John? You know, how about we throw a few caveats out here that this is the sermon of the devil? And sure enough, One of the more famous, this is in that book about the craft. One of the more famous 19th century Masons, who was Roman Catholic, was expelled from the Catholic Church, and then turned back in. He I don't know, reconverted or was received back into the Catholic Church and turned into an ardent anti-Freemason. And you'll love this, Nick. He said that Freemasonry was principally the worship of, take a guess.
Surely not Baphomet.
Baphomet in one, Nick, on the nose. On the nose, Nick, with Baphomet. Okay, woo.
It's that guy again.
All right.
Have we? I think we finally stopped the insane guys sending Baphomet messages to the WordPress site.
Well, as soon as this conversation goes up, they'll be back.
Yeah.
They'll be back. One of the most popular posts I've ever done, Nick, was about, Solway at Coagula and Baphomet. Oh my goodness. All right. I don't know if that answered your question. But yeah, I'm going through this is the beginning of the work. When you're dealing with Rowling's artistry and meaning, and she lays that out as the backdrop, you got to get into that. You got to say, what is that about? I'm suggesting that and here's this is not quite the chlamydia ectopic pregnancy type prediction, but when a man names his son Martin, not only does it mean that he's martial and sulfuric and that kind of relationship with the rest of the family, but I think it may be that he's a Freemason. That Michael Ellicott might have this in his closet background. I'm wondering, because of reading, having these books on my shelf, the new books on my shelf, speaking to me with a louder voice than most of the other books on my shelf. I'm wondering if Murphy isn't also a Freemason, and that a large part of his concern about this case is he's getting pressure on the Freemasons to shut this case down. It's not just that he wants Strike out of the picture. It's that his Freemason buddies are saying, really? You can't kill this story? We'll see. We'll see. This is like in the beginning, I said that Rokeby had to have been the evil guy that was plotting with drug dealers and all these things. And this could just be Rowling's masterful setup that we all think that Murphy now is just this. He's the guerrilla mask guy. He's a Freemason trying to do it. I mean, who knows? But right now, I'm following Rowling's lead, and I think Murphy is going to be shown to be he's Matt Cunliffe. Matt Cunliffe meets Baphomet. This is kind of crazy thing. All right. Shoot. Do we have 10 questions to go through? How are we going to do this? How are we possibly going to do this?
I don't think we're going to do 10, but let's see how we do.
All right. Not that I need to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick. You don't need any prompts. But it seemed to me that there were a lot of Welsh or border country names in Strike 8, especially in the Iron Bridge crowd. And Oklahoma is probably the most Welsh state. West Virginia and Oklahoma are the most Welsh state among the colonies. So maybe I'm just projecting here, but tell me, as an Englishman living in Wales, England, West England, border country, were you struck by this too?
I really was. So Ironbridge in particular, those local to Ironbridge all seem to have Welsh surnames. So we've got the Griffiths, of course. Griffiths is a Welsh surname. The Powells. So Powell is Ap Howell, son of Howell. So Powell is a very common Welsh surname. We've got Powell's so-called friend, Wyn Jones. Wyn is a very common Welsh first name. Jones is although it's an English surname, it's the most common Welsh surname. I'm just thinking back through my school rosters when they used to call your name out in class. There must have been half a dozen different Joneses in each class. Morgan is another Welsh surname. So I live in Glamorgan in Welsh that is Morgannwg, which is the land of Morgan. So people, even if they weren't from the Morgan family, if they came from Glamorgan and moved to a different area, very commonly they would pick up the surname Morgan. So yeah, they all seem to be Welsh surnames, which is curious because just very quick internet searches to people who live in Ironbridge or the Ironbridge Gorge, is the Welsh surnames don't seem to be as common as that. There are Welsh surnames there. In the Industrial Revolution, it was an iron and coal mining country, so there would have been some amount of Welsh emigration to there, but it still seems to be overrepresented. And I'm wondering if that is just a reflection of Rowling's own upbringing on the Welsh marches. Now, Rowling was a lot closer to Wales than Ironbridge is. When Rowling crossed her own Ironbridge into Chepstow, which was only a 15-minute walk from her house, she was in Wales. So there would have been a much higher concentration of Welsh surnames in her local area. And I'm wondering if that is just her homage to the community that she grew up in. There's lots of similarities, you know. It's a small town, with much bigger, fairly close neighbours. There's a river running through it. The community itself, because it's in a gorge, runs along a long ribbon, as Tuts Hill does. That there's a lot of similarities there.
We haven't talked about similarities. Is that there's a house in Ironbridge that has a trap door in it that goes down into a scary spot.
Yes. We know of another house that has a trap door in it. So the one in Ironbridge was dug by Ian Griffiths. The one in Church Cottage has always been there from the founding of the church and the cottage. So looking at the house and the church, St Luke's right next door to it, it sort of seems like it might be a small vicarage or priest's house. It wasn't. It was actually the original Church of England primary school to serve that community. The modern primary school actually is across the road. One of the great British institutions that was eradicated by that awful conservative Tory Margaret Thatcher was children were issued milk up until my time. So it was in the 80s that they stopped that milk distribution to school children. But even back to Victorian times, when this school was built, it was built with this very small cellar with a trapdoor over it. This was the cool room where the milk was stored for the school children.
And Rowling grew up with that in her house.
Yeah.
And being the imaginative child she was, I doubt she was thinking of milk for school children.
No. So there was some sort of legend that in the Smith biography, there was some sort of legend that there was a well underneath the floorboards, and I think this is just a corruption of that trapdoor and that small cellar. So when Rowling purchased the property and she got planning permission to improve it and sort out, there was a lot of wet rot actually in the floorboards of the place. They released plans for what they were doing. So we know with some certainty there isn't a well under there, but it was probably the stories the kids told about this trapdoor.
And we see that trapdoor, you know, in her very first book. Clearly, it's the trapdoor that they opened. Find Quirrell before the Mirror of Eris said. I mean, that's a I totally missed that. You know, it's like the when we meet the Nancarrows, the Travick Nancarrow family.
Yeah.
And we have a father with two young children. The mother has died, and there being grief between the older child and the father. It's like, wow, you know, it's Tuts Hill again. You know,
there's reflections, yeah.
And you don't need to know this stuff to enjoy Rowling's work.
Yeah.
But when you see it bubbling up again and again, like, oh, okay, this is fascinating stuff. Anyway, yeah, the Welsh thing. I mean, I was astonished to find that there were like Oxford colleges that were open to everyone unless they were Welsh. I don't know what that's about. Is that an English thing really? That the Welsh? Why wouldn't the Welsh be allowed in an Oxford college?
There's a lot of very early, sort of late medieval to late medieval laws and bylaws which were anti-Welsh, but there's now it's taken, certainly here in Wales, as being a racist sort of sentiment. I think it was a little bit more nuanced than that. So Welsh in Anglo-Saxon just meant foreigner, so someone who's not from here, or somebody who doesn't speak the language. So many towns and cities along the borders had regulations that any Welshman found in the town after sundown, you were allowed to shoot with a bow and arrow. And it wasn't counted as murder. But it wasn't so much because they didn't like Welsh people. It's because they didn't want foreigners or people who couldn't speak their tongue being within their communities when everyone was going to bed. And it's further complicated because a lot of what we now consider to be Wales wasn't considered Wales. And that was true until quite recently, actually. So my own hometown, Llantwit Major, or in Welsh, Llanwrtyd Fawr, was considered part of England up until relatively modern times, and until sort of the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. This was part of England.
I'm so relieved to hear you say that, because I'm waiting. If you talk to B. Groves about modern times, he's talking about Chaucer. You know, I mean,
yeah. You know. So certainly in Chaucer's period, in Elizabethan period, what we consider early modern, this would have been part of England. And even folk traditions, so even up until the Second World War, there was a Christmas tradition in Llantwit Major that's common to the West Country, called the Mummers, where kids would perform a play. And we have the text of the play, so somebody wrote it down before that. All of that folklore was lost. And it's in English, and it concerns Robin Hood, very traditional English folktale. And when Robin comes back to Llantwit, he says from the Middle East, he comes back to Llantwit and he says how pleased he is to find himself back in England. And this was not considered unusual. That really changed with the onset of Welsh nationalism. And Welsh nationalism was considered to start in the 1900s, but really had probably 100 or 200 years prior to that. But the identification of what was Wales and what was England was largely on language. And this was, by that time, this was, by Elizabethan times, this was an English-speaking community. So we were, prior to the Reformation, we were ruled by the Abbey of Tewkesbury, which was an English institution. We were a Grange of that institution. Just next door was a little bit different in Boverton. That was still a feudal institution under the Duke of Cornwall. That was very Welsh, but Llantwit Major would have been considered England because we spoke English.
I mean, I'm sorry if this seems like inside baseball to people who are watching this, but you have to remember that Nick is on one side of a border, and Roland grew up on the other side of the border, and it kind of a mirrored community. These are things of which Rowling is well aware.
Yes.
I mean, as you said, the Iron Bridge in her town takes you to Wales. I mean, it's that close.
And if you've ever been to the Welsh town of Chepstow, a more English town you could not imagine.
All right. On we go. How long is this thing going to go today, Nick? Do we have to come back and do
I
another
think
show or what?
let's try and do another if we can make it to the halfway marks. Let's try for another couple, and then
Okay.
maybe we'll have another show off the back of this. So, golden threads. So one of your key golden threads, John, is the use of embedded texts. And we know you like texts because you started off this recording with 12 of them on your desk in front of you. Now, you talked a little bit about Hiram Abif, and so we know Strike knows the story. Who is Hiram? What's the story about? And do you think this is going to turn out to be a core text?
Yeah. You can see me moving the books around here. I want to get back to Strike's. It's not Strike telling it, actually, even though Strike apparently is an expert in this. He when he's talking with Robin later, and he says, "How do you know all this about people's colors and what are they, scarves and purses? How do you do all that?" And she says, "The same reason you remember who Hiram Abif is." And to the Masons out there, I'm sorry if it's Hiram and I'm saying Hiram, and it's a Biff and I'm saying a beef. I don't know. It's part of my cred as a
I think we
Orthodox
should
Christian,
all.
is I can't pronounce those things.
I think we should all bow to the Hebrew scholars anyway.
All right, so Robin finds she's online looking into what people are saying about the murders next to the Masonic Hall at Ramses. And one of the stories in the paper says, online sleuths have been quick to point out that the murder of William Wright has strange echoes of the legend of Hiram Abif, the mythical Grand Master of the stonemasons who was entrusted with the building of King Solomon's temple, including a secret vault to house the Ark of the Covenant. Abif possessed knowledge of a secret word, a symbol of divine wisdom. Three lesser Masons, Jubilo, and Jubilum, which I think have to be read as the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms of jubilation.
Okay.
Which is, basically we're covering the entire spectrum of possibility. Three lesser Masons wished to gain knowledge of the word and threatened Abif, who refused to give it up and was therefore murdered inside the temple by the three tools sacred to Freemasons: the gauge, the square, and the gavel. Ornate versions of these were among the objects stolen from the Ramses silver vault, where the body of Wright was found. Now, okay. And then they refer to this again and again throughout the book about, Hiram Abif and Hiram Abif and Hiram Abif. And that's a sign that, and then we get the core texts of Bridge to Light. Do you want to read Albert Pike's book about morals and dogmas? And we have it constantly hammered on us that that's the most frequent epigraph is Masonic ritual texts. So I'm wondering if the murder of Hiram Abif isn't the model, much like the Silkworm, as written by Liz Tassel, was the text within the text of the second Strike novel. I don't know enough about that. I should preface everything that I'm going to be saying today with, I don't know enough about this to say this with any kind of authority, but I hope that the serious strikers out there, I'm thinking about Kelly Loomis and Ed Shardlow and Sandy Hope and the crowd, the true crowd out there, Kathleen O'Connor, if she's still with us, that they'll be thinking about how you can think about the death of Tyler Powell. Tyler is another name for Mason. That the death of that Mason, so named, inside a silver vault, ritually with Masonic elements, how is that a reproduction of Hiram of Beef, and how does that play out in terms of that story? Now, I've got 3 books that I'm going to be looking at that talk about the death of Hiram of Beef, including the Hiram Key and the Book of Hiram, and see if that works. But right now I can't see. I don't see 3 people trying to kill him. Right now I'm seeing Ian Griffiths as Calvin Osgood, and maybe Todd, whether it's Todd James or Michael Todd, whatever his name is. And if you want to include Lord Brantfoot, maybe, but other than that, I'm not seeing the 3 types of killers that are down there doing it, because it seems to be basically a one-man slaughterhouse, really. But that's something that I want to put out there, is that maybe this Masonic text, which is reenacted, something I can just share right now about the murder of Hiram of Beef, is that you go through the first 2 stages relatively quickly, but to enter the 3rd stage is to enter into the second part of the much larger 33-degree program. It's really when you become officially a Mason. And in that ritual, you die the death of Hiram of Beef, and you're raised out of a grave, out of the box, by a man dressed with a lion's mask and with a lion's paw. And in that, I think we're supposed to see the lion's victory over the Griffith, which is part of the alchemical purification process. Hence, the Griffith being the murderer and the lion being the incestuous relationship, because that relationship of the king and the queen inside that box is considered to be like a brother and a sister in an incestuous union in terms of alchemical language. Again, Rowling is playing with all of these tropes from metallurgical alchemy's symbolism and weaving it into a story. And I think she's using that ritual from Hiram of Beef as what was happening. And he does, Tyler Powell obviously is raised from the vault. He's still dead, but I think he haunts this book, and he wants basically Sapphire to be raised from the vault alive at the finish. And Strike makes that sacrificial plunge into that Tuts Hill secret trap door. I hope this I hope if anybody's following this other than you, Nick, if anyone's able to keep up with this, I think this is why I want to reemphasize the points that we talked about that we know that in 20 years people are going to be saying. One, it's a junkyard in terms of the surface story and the moral meaning. It's a fail in terms of the mystery. Second, the book's only really important because it sets up the last 2 books. And I hope today that's the bridge, and that it also completes the albedo, the sex part of this book, the spiritual transformation thing. And last and most important is that this book is, of all the things that Rowling has written, I think really lays out that you really have to know the Lake Springs, just get a grip on her inspiration. But boy, you've got to have those shed tools sharp. You really have to be aware of what they are, where to look for them, like just the mythology thing. We went into it because Rowling's tweet, but I've been talking about that for 4 or 5 years now. And the rest of Strike fandom was like, mythology, yeah, John, John being patted on the head, John's fetish. That if you don't have those tools sharp, you're going to miss a large part of the artistry and meaning, the alchemy, the mythology, the embedded texts. These are things that Rowling really does. Not to mention the narrative misdirection and all those things. This is the most 4th generation, demanding text that Rowling has written to date. And I expect that's what they're going to be for the future. And we have people saying they're not going to read the last 2 books. They're so disappointed in this thing. Well, that's a confession that they don't understand the way she writes.
John,
That's
thank you very much for explaining about the legend of Hiram Abiff. It's reminded me of a theory that's been current, I think, for quite a while, that Jack the Ripper, the Victorian London murderer, was a Mason.
and he had a Baphomet tattoo. I mean, what?
Well, he in one of the murders, he or the scene of the crime, scrawled on the wall were the words, "The Jews are the men who won't be blamed for nothing." Except Jews wasn't spelt Jew, it was spelt Ju. And when the police inspector arrived, he covered up the writing. The theory being the Jus were the three murderers of Hiram Abiff, and Jack the Ripper was a Mason, and the police inspector was a Mason and covered it up as part of that just occurred to me when you read out the name of the three murderers.
I want to say that in my very brief, look through for things about this story, I've never seen those three names except in Hallmarked Man. So
Yeah.
we got to find out where Rowling is getting her stuff.
Yeah.
It might be. I mean, I've looked at the Bridge to Light has a couple of pages on this, and there's no mention of the names of the three things. And Hiram isn't just the name of the architect, if you will, of the temple. It's also the name of the king of Tyre, which is, I think it was in opposition to Solomon. And so Solomon is there, Hiram of Tyre is there, and Hiram the builder is there. So you have this twinning of Hiram, just as we have a twinning of Calvin Osgood. And I don't know if we have time for that, Nick, but the Calvin Osgood name is a giant thing. Just real quickly, just the book I told you the Idiot's Guide. He's flipping through it, and sure enough, Calvin, who is really the much really more than Luther, Calvin is the genius, if you will, the religious genius of the Protestant Reformation. And almost all the sects show influence of Calvin's work,
particularly in Scotland, I think.
So, I mean, that's a really strong name. Well, Calvin, he's the one who talks about the architect of the universe, and that, I mean, all I have to do is find the Idiot's Guide. Where is it? Come on, Nick, where's my Idiot's Guide? There it is. The Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry. The Great Architect of the Universe is a title for God as creator. Its first Masonic use was in Reverend James Anderson's 723. So Anderson, a Presbyterian minister, no doubt picked it up from John Calvin's Institutes of Christian Religion. Calvin, whose teachings form the basis of theology for Presbyterian and Reformed churches, refers to God as the architect of the universe and refers to his works as the architecture of the universe. Masons sometimes abbreviate the phrase GAOTU, which we meet inside Hallmarked Man. So Calvin Osgood has a bunch of meanings. Really, just very quickly, Oz is another name for God, and good is either interpreted just as good, the goodness of God. It's also like the German God, Goth, that is Osgoth rather than Osgood. Now that's a weird name because you have, Calvin Good God is a hyper religious name, and it's if you look up Osgood, you find out that not only is it tied to Venus, let me see if I can find this real quickly. I'll put this in the notes below. Astrologically, the name Osgood is linked to the planet Venus.
Wow.
Venus is the planet of love, beauty, and creativity. So be it. But much more interesting to me is that of the nicknames of people named Osgood, the most popular one, Nick, is Augie.
Oggy.
Now, what is that?
So this is a Cornish pasty. I have a sister in Cornwall. I have a sister in Cornwall who sends me care packages, just like the present for strike from Cornwall, which consists largely of Cornish pasties, which are meat and vegetable pies, speciality of Cornwall. That now in Cornwall, in Cornish rather, this is called an oggen. So a Cornish pasty with potatoes in it would be a teddy oggen or an oggy. And the sporting chant, particularly in rugby for the Cornish, would be oggy, oggy, oggy. And the response is oi, oi, oi. So oggy is a very common nickname for a Cornishman, particularly in the armed forces.
Okay. So we see Graham Hardacre calls him Augie consistently.
Yes.
And I think it's in Silkworm, Ilsa and Nick also call him Augie.
Yeah.
Which is from Ilsa, who's Cornish. It's just an affectionate thing. For Nick, it may be a bit of a dig,
Yeah.
But it's a mystery to the rest of us in Strike fandom as to where Augie comes from, and now we know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that Osgood, that people named Osgood, their nickname is Augie, and yet all the research I did in that name, I didn't see a single reference to Cornwall. But I wonder, anyway, you've given a much better explanation. I love the fact that you get care packages from Cornwall, Nick. I mean, your connection to Cornwall is great. Don't you have a greater connection to Canada than to Cornwall?
You could argue. So the Cornish, much like the Welsh, emigrated all around the world. So it used to be, before the turn of the century, any hole in the ground, if you looked at the bottom of it, you'd find a Cornishman. So they went where the mines were, particularly the hard rock mining. The Welsh, here we have limestone, so they're soft rock miners. So you could almost, if you looked at a geological map of the world, and you look at the hard rock places and the soft rock places, Welsh miners went to the soft rock places and Cornish miners went to the hard rock places. It's a very different technique of mining. So Canada, iron ore is hard rock mining. That's Cornish went up there. The gold mining out west was largely Cornish rather than Welsh. In Australia, again, gold mining, hard rock mining was more Cornish than Welsh. But yeah, the emigration was not unusual. What was unusual is my grandfather, after he worked in the mines, he joined the Canadian Army in the First World War. When he was demobbed back to Canada, he decided he didn't like mining anymore. So he moved down to Detroit to work in the Ford factory that had just opened.
You're an American.
Yeah.
You're an American.
That's where he met my grandmother and where my father was born. And then, unfortunately, the Great Depression hit. All the factories closed down. But fortunately, at the same time, the lord of the manor where my great-grandfather was farming had death dues, had to sell the farm that my great-grandfather was leasing. Great-grandfather managed to get enough money to buy the farm, but wasn't fit enough to work it. So the whole family emigrated back to Cornwall to take up farming.
No, but your father's an anchor baby.
Yeah.
You have rights. You have rights to claim citizenship, Nick. I think you need to escape the United Kingdom before it collapses on itself.
But I'd be giving up this socialist paradise that I love so much, John. I couldn't imagine.
Yes, you would. You would. Roll up your pant leg, Nick. Cut those shackles. Join the Masons in the United States. Yeah. Anyway, to Augie. I wish that I'm going to call you Augie now because anyway. seriously, you can claim to be an American, you can claim to be
Yeah.
a Cornishman, you're an Englishman, you're living in Wales. Seriously, Nick, what a cosmopolitan character you are.
Citizen of the world, John.
Yeah, with a Napoleophile, no less.
Yeah.
You know, I can see. This
John,
reminds me of when I moved to North Carolina when I got out of college, and they said, "Well, where are you from?" You know, the little faculty, get together, and I said, "Well, I was born in New York, but I grew up in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I went to school in New Hampshire, and I spent time in Ohio, and I lived in Chicago for a time, and I went to school in Chicago." And they looked at me like, confused, but they were kind of nodded their heads to each other. And I thought they were marveling at how many places I'd lived. And instead, the comment I heard first was, "So you're from up north." And I imagine in Japan, when you describe your family's odysseys back and forth, they're like, "Yes, gaijin."
Yeah. Yeah. John, this has been a joy as ever.
We got halfway through our list.
Halfway through our list, so I think we've got a part 2 episode coming up.
Wow. So less time for me to chart and okay. Anyway, we'll schedule that and
Yes.
We'll see you all. I thank you all for your comments. To the paid subscribers, you're getting something in your box tonight. We got it last night. I forget how soon Nick will get this out. Yeah. Thank you for keeping the lights on. Thank
you, everyone. Thank you, John. Bye now.